When I was in high school, I was 5'2". When I went to college and came home 3 months later, I was 6 foot. So the first thing I learned was things change. And you have to be sort of prepared for that. It's never precisely what you think it's going to be. The advantage that you have in coming here is that you get to see that these amazing things that get done in the world get done by real people. I mean, they're just guys, they're women, they're young people, older people. And if they can do it, you can do it. Sort of the upside of my middle-of-the-nowhere high school was that it had an arts program. So I kind of knew from the time that I was in 9th grade that I was going to be an artist. So then the million-dollar question is, how does that happen, and what do you do, and what are you going to make? And when I enter the art world, it's all about Picasso. You know, it's Picasso and Matisse, and these guys are in Life magazine. They're the rock stars of the art world. By the time I hit college, where I actually started to think about what I was going to do, the conceptual, minimalist, theory-driven side of the art world had taken root. And there were bits and pieces of that I really liked. I was always drawn to this idea of a minimalist position. The problem for me with minimalism, and of course you always do this business of like killing the father. You know, you come in, you admire it, and then you have to kill it and move on. So the problem for me with minimalism was that it was precariously too close to design. It would drop too easily into the background and become part of the architecture. And I wanted something that was more human than that, that made more demands on me. So eventually I came to realize that a bad figurative painting held my attention longer than a really good abstract painting. So I knew I was going to do something with the figure, but what, I wasn't quite sure. So I started a series of paintings that had a single figure in it, and they had a large abstract field behind them. And eventually, the problem in these paintings was, who gets painted? Well, the way I solved it at that time was I just made 25 paintings of my wife. Eventually, the background overwhelmed the foreground, and I tried to solve the problem of a humanized minimalist position by getting my hand into the painting and sort of revealing myself as an artist in these pieces. Now, in the meantime, lots of other things have happened. I took a summer off and decided I would write a beach book. And we got the book done, went out and got an agent and was on people's desks, and went nowhere. So in a way, you could think of that experience of writing this book as this giant mistake and this giant waste of time. But the truth of the issue was the process of writing that book helped me turn from this very theoretical position, which is very internalized, about how to make a painting, to looking out at the world. And it made me start thinking about an external view of the world rather than an internal view of the world. I'd spent a year, instead of reading theory and reading about art, I've been reading about how you stop a freighter in the middle of the seas and eavesdropping on people's conversations in subways, trying to make the dialogue of this book work. So my focus had shifted. When the book was done, and I went back and tried to figure out what I was going to do now, I knew I wanted to solve this problem of my relationship to a minimalist position and how I was going to make art with it. So I'd gotten out these paintings, and these paintings were my wife on an abstract field, very large, and I lived with them for a year. And at the end of that year, I figured out that the thing that interested me was not the person in the painting. It was the gaze. It was this idea of one person looking directly into the eyes of another person. And that, for me, was the subject of the piece. Once I worked out what the subject of the piece was, then it's only it's only a question of methodology. How do you communicate that? How do you establish that position visually? Essentially, we're unknowable. I mean, from you to you, there's a certain amount of social contact, but this idea of knowing what's going on in somebody else's head is an impossible situation. So I would try to create a scenario where there was the maximum way of exploiting that. An object, any sort of art object, has three components. There's the object, the artist, and the viewer. And if I know what the subject is, if the subject is the gaze, then I have to find meaning. What is what meaning? What is my intent? And my intent is to create a scenario where meaning happens halfway between the painting and the viewer. So the way for me to do that is to strip everything out of the painting except for the gaze. The backgrounds are white because I'm not setting up a location for you to view the piece in. There's no history to it. There's no narrative. The most important thing for me is there's no time. I'm trying to get all the time out of the piece by getting the subject to neither move nor gesture, not to smile, not to show an emotion, because I want to hook the viewer into the painting and I want them to stay there for as long as possible. And what I want you to do with these paintings is to basically find a place where transference happens. When somebody goes to a shrink, the psychiatrist will try and tell you as little as possible about themselves so that your subconscious is projected onto them. This was the same agenda with the paintings. I try and tell you as little as I can about the people so that the meaning of these pieces happens somewhere in between the painting and you.